The kingdom of Valeria was dying. The grey, endless rain fell on the crumbling royal palace, like tears on a wrinkled, old face. Inside, Queen Anaya screamed. It was not a royal sound. It was the raw, animal cry of a body breaking apart. King Theron stood with his back to her, watching his kingdom, his legacy, shatter with every drop of rain. A thin cry cut through the air, so weak it was almost swallowed by the thunder. A prince. The midwife wrapped the child, but her eyes were tired. A prince, your majesty. The king turned. He looked at the tiny, sick boy, his skin pale, his breath a fragile flutter. A bad omen. Arion, Theron said, the name like ash in his mouth. A burden. He turned away again. But it wasn't over. Half an hour later, another cry tore through the room, this one full of fury. A daughter. Healthy, pink, and screaming like a storm. The midwife smiled. A princess, strong and hale. A venomous light filled the king's eyes. He saw not a daughter, but an asset. A bargaining chip in a game he was losing. Seris, he declared. A price. That very night, a deal was struck. A daughter was sold for land and gold before she even knew her own name. 2 stars, born together, were thrown into 2 separate, dark skies. 17 years is a long time to be a ghost. For Prince Arion, it was the only life he ever knew. He was the royal family's shameful secret, hidden away in the dusty, silent library. It was his home. While other boys learned the sword, Arion learned the quiet rustle of a turning page. He was ignored. And in that, he found a strange kind of freedom. He saw everything. The lies. The secrets. The fear in his own father's eyes. Tonight, a coup raged outside the library doors. He heard the screams. He knew what was coming. He sat at his favorite reading table. If he was to die, he would die where he had lived. The library doors burst open. 2 men stood there, their swords bloody. They wore the colors of Duke Valerus, the man who had bought his sister. Well, well, the first assassin said. The ghost prince. I thought you were just a rumor. Arion slowly closed his book. It seems rumors are all my family has left, he said, his voice strangely calm. The scarred man laughed. The Lord's orders are to clean the slate. No offense, Your Highness. It's just dynastic hygiene. Arion hurled the massive book he was reading at them. It caught the second man in the face, and he staggered back, blood gushing from his nose. Arion ran, not for the door, but deeper into the maze of shelves. He moved with a silent grace born from years of hiding. Find him, the assassin snarled. Arion pressed himself into the shadows, his breath ragged. A strange, cold energy seemed to answer his terror. For a crazy second, he felt like he could command the darkness. The second man, his face a mask of blood, rounded the corner. Arion lunged, jamming his bony fingers into the man's eyes. But it only bought him a second. The scarred man was on him, his blade a flash of light. Arion felt a sudden, shocking cold in his gut. He looked down and saw a dagger sticking out of his stomach. He slid down a bookshelf, his blood smearing priceless leather books. Nothing personal, the killer said. As the world faded to grey, Arion's last thought was a name from a forgotten lullaby. Seris. A sharp pain, like a cord snapping, and then only darkness. Miles away, Seris laughed, a sound like silver bells. She was the jewel of the court, a predator disguised as prey, her beauty a weapon and her mind a razor. Tonight, she moved through a victory party for the man who had orchestrated the coup, her guardian, the Duke. She hated him with every fiber of her being. She stepped onto a balcony, and a sudden, sharp pain shot through her soul, as if something precious had been torn from her. Are you all right? A soft voice asked. It was Alara, another of the Duke's wards, a jealous rival, holding out a glass of wine. A drink, to the future. Seris's mind screamed a warning, but she was still shaken from that phantom pain. She took the goblet. To the future. One small sip, Instantly, she knew. Poison. A cold numbness spread through her body. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. Her last sight was Alara's dark shape, watching her die. Her final emotion was not fear, but pure, unadulterated rage. This is not how it ends. Then, nothing. A silent, velvet blackness. Arion. The thought was not his own. Seris. He projected back, the name a lifetime of loss. They were together, two flickering embers of pure soul. Born as one, murdered as two, they finally met in death. The void around them tore open. On one side, a breathing vortex of liquid night, whispering secrets of an endless darkness. Arion felt it was a part of him. On the other, a singing star of pure light, radiating the warmth of all creation. Seris felt it as an echo of her own soul. They were shown the future, a world drowning in chaos. And they were offered a choice. A pact. You were cheated, the shadow hissed, promising vengeance. Become my blade. Your spark was extinguished, the light sang, promising justice. Become my vessel. Return to the past. Rewrite everything. Life? Their answer was a single, unified thought that blazed through the void. Yes. The world exploded. Arion's eyes snapped open with a ragged gasp. He was small. Weak. He lifted a chubby, dimpled fist, the hand of a toddler. Miles away, Seris jolted awake in her cradle, a silent scream in her throat, the ghost of poison on her tongue. 15 years. They had 15 years. Across the crumbling kingdom, two children lay in their beds, their eyes wide with adult terror and a shared, burning memory of the steel and the poison that had ended them. And in the silence, a single, horrifying thought took root, clear as a funeral bell. It wasn't a dream. To be a king trapped in the mind of a toddler is a special kind of hell. For Arion, the first year back in the world was a living nightmare. He, whose mind held the wisdom of 1,000 books, could not speak a single clear word. He, who had carried himself with the silent pride of a scholar, was now forced to have mushy carrots spoon-fed to him by a maid who always smelled of sour milk. His parents, the king and queen, were cold and distant. They saw a quiet, sickly child who stared at walls, and they were happy to leave him alone in his golden cage. They had no idea that behind their son's empty eyes, a murdered man was planning to burn their kingdom to the ground. Rage was a fire in his small chest. It burned when a smiling nurse praised him for using a potty. It blazed when they dressed him in ridiculous satin suits with frilly collars that scratched his neck raw. But the worst pain was his weakness. His mind remembered the cold weight of a steel sword and the delicate dance of politics, but his body was a soft, clumsy prison. He remembered the sharp, biting agony of a dagger in his stomach, but he couldn't even walk across a room without falling. One rainy afternoon, trapped in his nursery, he saw it. A tiny mark on the wooden toy chest, carved with a hunting scene. A small scratch next to the eye of a deer, a mark that wasn't there yesterday. It was a crescent moon. His heart stopped. It was a secret sign, a mark their first mother had used to tell his and Seris's cribs apart in the 1 week they had shared together. It was a message. A scream across the silent distance. She remembers. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Somewhere in this city, his twin was living the same hell. She was alive. She was aware. She was reaching out to him. The rage in his heart, once a wildfire, was now a focused, white-hot flame. He had an ally. He had to answer. The next day, in a pretend tantrum, he snatched a silver spoon from a tray. When the nurse turned her back, he leaned over the chest and clawed a tiny, clumsy starburst right next to the moon. The message was sent. The game had begun. Across the city, in the Grand Valerus Manor, 6-year-old Seris felt a jolt of victory deep in her soul when she saw the star. 4 months, she had been the perfect doll. Lady Seris, the Duke's beautiful, fragile ward, with a shy smile and perfect manners. But inside, she was a viper, coiled and waiting for the right moment to strike. She had bribed a stable boy with a stolen cake to sneak her carving tool, a sharpened nail, into the royal palace, hidden in a bag of horse feed. The risk had been terrifying, but it had worked. Arion was with her. Now, the true danger began. They had to reunite. In her past life, Seris had memorized the palace floor plans, always paranoid about needing an escape route. She remembered one, an old gardener's tunnel. It connected the forgotten east wing, where Arion was kept, to an overgrown rose maze outside the palace walls. It was surely sealed, but sealed for an adult was a challenge, not a dead end, for a clever child. Their secret conversation continued, scratched onto the toy chest moved back and forth by the stable boy who knew nothing. A crude map. A date. A time. The night of the new moon, when darkness would be their shield. The night came, starless and heavy. Arion, faking a fever, listened as the guard's footsteps faded down the hall. His tiny heart hammered against his ribs. He slid out of bed, a small ghost in a simple nightshirt. The lock on his door was old. He had spent weeks working it with a thin wire he'd pulled from a worn-out tapestry. The palace at night was a monster of shadows and groaning noises. Every creak of the floor was like thunder. Using the memories of his 17-year-old self, he navigated the maze of hallways. He reached the dusty, tapestry-covered archway hiding the passage. A heavy, iron-banded door blocked his way, its huge, rusted lock shining faintly in the dim light. Despair clawed at him. It was too strong. He was trapped. Suddenly, a scratching sound from the other side. A sliver of a pale face appeared in the crack of the door. Seris. Her eyes burned with a fire that did not belong in the face of a child. The bolt, she whispered, her voice like the wind. It's on your side. Rusted shut. Can you move it? Arion threw all his pathetic weight against the iron bolt. It didn't even tremble. He pushed again, a scream of frustration caught in his throat. Nothing. The iron was fused to the wood by time and rust. He slumped against the door, defeated. As his hope died, his anger and desperation boiled over. Move, he screamed in his mind, not at his weak arms, but at the bolt itself. And then he felt it. The strange, cold power he had felt in his final moments. A well of living darkness stirred in the pit of his stomach. He stared at the shadow cast by the bolt. He pushed, not with his hands, but with his will, with all the rage in his soul. He didn't see anything move. But he heard it. A deep, groaning screech of tortured metal. The bolt, caked in rust, slid back an inch. Hope exploded in his chest. He focused again, pushing harder, feeling the power drain from him, as if the darkness were drinking his life force. The shadow under the bolt seemed to twist and writhe. With a final, echoing shriek, the bolt slid free. He threw the heavy door open and stumbled into the dark tunnel. Seris was there, her small hand grabbing his. Come on, she urged, her voice strong and steady. We have to go. Now? They ran, two small ghosts fleeing through a tunnel that smelled of wet earth and dying leaves. They burst into the rose maze, the thorns of dead roses catching their nightshirts. In the center of the maze, a stone bench sat beneath a weeping willow tree. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, panting. You died of poison, Arion said, his voice hoarse. It wasn't a question. Seris nodded, her eyes like chips of ice. One of the Duke's other wards. Elara. And you. I felt you die first. A blade, wasn't it? A dagger in the gut, he confirmed. One of his men. There were no tears. Their pain was too vast for tears. It was a cold, hard stone at the foundation of their new life. The spirits, Seris said. When I died, there was a light. It felt like coming home. For me, it was darkness, Arion confessed, shivering as he remembered the power that had opened the door. It's inside me now. I can feel it. It's hungry. He was the blade. She was the light. Their path was clear. Seris reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm, a shocking contrast to the cold that lived under his skin. Then we swear an oath, she said, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen. On the blood they stole from us and the lives they took. On the memory of the dagger, and the ghost of the poison. We will not be their victims. We will not be their puppets. We will climb over their dead bodies, we will burn down their houses, and we will take back our throne. You and I, together. Together, Arion echoed, his grip tightening on hers. We will never fall again. Beneath the weeping willow, two hidden fires made a vow. Their childhood was over. Their war had just begun. Returning to his lonely room, Arion was transformed. The wild rage had cooled into an icy blade of purpose. That flicker of shadow was a key, and he would find the lock it was meant for. He remembered a name from his past life, King Malika the Veiled, an ancestor who practiced forbidden arts. His books had been locked away, his history erased. Arion's isolation was now his greatest weapon. He faked sickness and spent days in the dusty, unused chambers near the old archives. He ran his small hands over every wall, tapped every floorboard, searching. He found it behind a crumbling light fixture, a floorboard cut just a little shorter than the rest. He pried it up, revealing a small iron ring. He pulled. A section of the stone floor slid open, revealing a dark shaft leading down into pure blackness. A cold air rose from it, humming with the same dark energy he now carried in his soul. It was calling to him. With a stolen candle, he climbed down. The shaft led to a small, hidden tomb. On a stone table in the center lay a single book, bound in a strange, black, scaly material that seemed to drink the candlelight. He opened it. The words on the page seemed to squirm like living things, but as he stared, their meaning flooded his mind. The Art of Shadows. It spoke of shadow not as an absence of light, but as a real, tangible thing. It taught how to shape the darkness, to make cloaks of twilight and daggers of pure void. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. He began to train. Every night, in the total silence of his room, he practiced. He started small, focusing on a single candle flame. He reached out with that cold piece of his soul and pulled. The shadow at the base of the candle stretched, twisted, and then lunged up, snuffing out the flame with a soft whoosh, plunging the room into darkness. A thrill of terror and power shot through him. He could feel the ancient spirit of shadow inside him, a predator uncoiling in his soul, and he knew that if he ever lost control, it would devour him whole. While Arion danced with darkness, Seris searched for the light. She knew her power, aura, was a living art, passed from master to student. She needed a teacher. And she remembered the perfect man, Sir Kaelan, the former captain of the Royal Guard. Kaelan was a man of great honor, who had retired in disgust at the king's corruption. Now he lived in a small cottage, tending to his roses and his regrets. Seris went to him not as a queen, but as a small, lost girl. She found him gently trimming a white rose bush. "Sir Knight," she asked, her voice deliberately small and shaky. Kaelan turned, his hard, wrinkled face softening. "Just Kaelan now, little one. What can I help you with?" "They say you were the best," she said, her eyes wide. "They say you could see a man's heart just by looking at him." A sad smile touched his lips. "That was a long time ago." "I want to be strong," Seris whispered, letting her shoulders slump. "But I get so tired. The doctors say I am weak. But I feel things. Like the sunlight has a feeling. Like this garden is happy. I thought maybe you could teach me to control it. So it doesn't make me feel so overwhelmed." Kaelan's eyes sharpened. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw past the small child to the burning soul within. "This is not a game, child," he said, his voice stern. "It takes a discipline few adults have." "Please, sir," she begged, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes, a perfect performance of a frightened child. "I don't want to be weak anymore." He saw a fragile girl who needed a guide, not a reincarnated queen sharpening her greatest weapon. He let out a long sigh. "Very well. Be here tomorrow at dawn. We start with breathing." If you are late even once, we are finished. Her training was a trial of patience. Kaelin taught her to sit for hours, to feel the world not with her eyes, but with her soul. On the 5th day, as she sat in his garden, she finally broke through. The world exploded into a glorious ocean of energy. She saw Kaelin's aura, a steady flame of silver-grey regret and duty. She felt the gentle, green pulse of the plants and the tiny, nervous sparks of insects in the dirt. It was overwhelming, but for the first time, she was not lost in the flood. She was the flood. As the sun set, a boy in a dark crypt molded shadow into a blade that cut the air with a silent hiss. Miles away, a girl in a quiet garden felt the heartbeat of sleeping roses, a warm, golden light pooling in her hands. They were twin stars, hidden behind the faces of children. The world slept, unaware that its future rulers, the monarchs of shadow and light, had finally begun to master their power. The Ilarian Royal Academy was a beautiful lie. Its ivory towers clawed at the sky and its perfect emerald lawns promised a world of knowledge and honor. But beneath the polished surface, it was a snake pit, a place where the children of the rich and powerful came to sharpen their cruelty into weapons. For Arion and Seris, now 10 years old, it was the perfect hunting ground. Their arrival was a quiet spectacle of two extremes. Seris stepped from a rich carriage, a picture of innocence in pale blue silk. She clung to her chaperone's arm, her wide eyes playing the part of a frightened lamb thrown to the wolves. The other students saw a beautiful, breakable doll. They saw prey. Then came Arion. He walked onto the grounds alone, his clothes plain, his face pale, and his body as thin as a reed in the wind. He carried a single book. As he passed a group of older boys, a cruel whisper followed him like a disease, the Ghost Prince. Their nightmare took shape almost instantly. Cassian Valerus, the Duke's nephew, swaggered toward them. He had a cruel smile and the dead, empty eyes of a shark. He saw himself as the king of the academy, and Arion's royal blood was an insult to his ego. Well, Cassian sneered, blocking Arion's path. His two massive friends, Gorlo and Pike, stood behind him like loyal dogs. Look what crawled out of the shadows. I didn't know they let phantoms into the academy. Arion stopped, his face a blank mask. For a split second, his eyes met Seris's across the courtyard. A silent message passed between them, let him play. Stick to the plan. He looked back at Cassian and gave a small, fake cough. Some of us prefer the library, Arion said, his voice quiet but sharp, to the sound of donkeys braying in a field. Cassian's smile froze. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone who looked like he could be knocked over by a strong gust of wind. He slammed his hand into Arion's shoulder. It wasn't a gentle push. Arion, playing his part perfectly, stumbled back and dropped his book into a muddy puddle. A wave of cruel laughter swept through the courtyard. Arion stared at his ruined book, the murky water soaking its pages. He looked up at Cassian, his eyes empty of fear, empty of anger. It was like looking into a deep, dark well, and for a moment, it unnerved the bully. Without a word, Arion bent down, picked up his dripping book, and walked around them. Across the yard, Seris watched, pure rage burning like ice in her veins. It took every ounce of her will not to scream. To the world, she was a pitiful girl watching a poor boy being bullied. Inside her, a queen was sharpening a guillotine blade, with Cassian's name already on it. The daily torture began. In the dining hall, Gorlo would accidentally trip a server, sending a tray of hot stew spilling all over Arion. In class, Pike would steal Arion's notes, earning him a stern lecture from the tutors. Cassian was the puppet master behind it all, his taunts a slow, dripping poison. Arion took it all with a chilling, inhuman calm. He was a rock in a river of hate, letting their cruelty wash over him. This was his shield. His true self he saved for the night. When the academy slept, Arion's true training began. He didn't just walk in the shadows, he became one with them. He learned to move like smoke through the rafters of the clock tower, his body silent and disciplined. His power was growing stronger. One night, while hiding from a watchman, he felt the man's eyes sweep toward his hiding spot. Panic flared. Arion focused his will, not on himself, but on a bush 10 feet away. He pulled a sliver of darkness from the wall and threw it at the bush, making it rustle. The watchman's head snapped toward the sound. "Who's there?" he shouted, and as he went to investigate, Arion melted back into the night, his heart pounding with triumph. He hadn't just hidden, he had manipulated his hunter. A dark whisper in his soul, the spirit of the ancient shadow, promised him vengeance, and with every jeer and shove he suffered, he found himself listening more closely. While Arion danced with darkness, Seris waltzed with light. She was the perfect delicate flower, always ready with a shy smile and an innocent question. But her fragile body was a Trojan horse, hiding an empress gathering an arsenal of secrets. Her aura sense was a powerful weapon. She could feel the ugly heat of jealousy, the slick oil of lies. One afternoon in the library, she sat near two girls from powerful families, whispering about their troubles. "Professor Everett is going to fail me," one cried. Seris let out a soft sigh. "Oh, forgive me," she whispered when they looked at her. "It's just the poor professor. I heard his family lost all their money in a trade deal. He's been so bitter ever since." The information was a tiny, poisoned dart. One girl's family had caused the professor's ruin. The other girl's family was their rival. Seris watched them walk away, a new wall of suspicion between them. She had planted a seed of poison, and now she would simply watch it grow. They were a blade and a shield, working in perfect, deadly harmony. When a kitchen worker, paid by Cassian, tried to trap Seris in a pantry, Arion used his power to send every pot and pan on a high shelf crashing down in a deafening metal storm, allowing Seris to slip away while the man screamed about kitchen ghosts. In return, when a tutor tried to have Arion expelled, Seris whispered a rumor about the man's gambling debts into the right ear. The rumor spread like wildfire, and the man was disgraced and dismissed within a week. The hate campaign finally exploded on a cold, rainy evening behind the armory. Cassian, furious at Arion's unbreakable calm, cornered him. "No more games, Ghost Prince," he snarled, shoving Arion against the damp wall. "No crowds, no teachers. We are going to teach you a lesson." Gorlo cracked his huge knuckles. Pike held a wooden practice sword. Arion's mind screamed. He felt the cold power rising in him. The shadows in the alley coiled, ready to strike. He could end them. He could form a blade of pure darkness, and leave them bleeding on the stones. The shadow inside him begged to be released. It promised him silence. It promised him peace. But Seris's voice echoed in his memory, "No witnesses. We are weak, remember?" He had to fight without fighting. "I don't want trouble," Arion said, his voice trembling just enough. Too late, Cassian spat, and lunged. This was the moment. As Cassian's fist flew at his face, Arion fell. He didn't dodge, he collapsed, letting his knees buckle. The punch whistled over his head. At the same time, Pike swung the wooden sword. Arion rolled, not away, but right into Gorlo's legs. The giant brute, stepping forward for a kick, let out a bellow of surprise as his feet were swept out from under him, and he crashed to the ground with a sickening thud. It was 3 seconds of beautiful, planned chaos. Arion channeled his power, pulling the darkness from the walls and weaving it over the slick cobblestones, making them impossibly slippery. He amplified the sound of dripping rain, making it sound like approaching footsteps. "Watchman," he hissed in a panicked voice. It worked. Cassian and Pike spun around, distracted. In that instant, Arion was on his feet. He moved like a flash of lightning, shoving Pike, who was already off balance, straight into Cassian. The two collided. Their feet found no grip on the shadow-slick stones. They flailed wildly, a pathetic dance of panic, before collapsing into a filthy puddle of mud and water. Arion stood over them, the rain plastering his dark hair to his head. His mask of weakness crumbled, and for a heartbeat, they saw what he truly was, a king, judging insects. "Is that all?" he asked, his voice a blade of pure ice. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent, leaving 3 humiliated bullies in the filth, terrified and unable to understand how the weak, sickly prince had defeated them without throwing a single punch. That night, in the abandoned rose maze, Seris saw the fresh bruise on Arion's cheek. Her touch was soft as a feather as she traced it, but her eyes were cold as a frozen lake. "He will pay for this," she whispered, her voice a deadly promise. "Not with mud. With ruin. I've spent a month earning the trust of Lady Amelie. She keeps a diary. A diary full of details about how Cassian cheats on his tests and steals money from his own family to pay for his gambling." Arion watched her, a slow, grim smile on his face. He had fought with shadows and tricks to protect their secret. She was about to fight with whispers and disgrace, weapons that left scars far deeper than any sword. He had learned how to win a fight. She was about to learn how to destroy a life. The academy was their training ground, but the real war was just beginning. The annual botany excursion was, to Arion, a special kind of hell. They were marched into the Gloomwood, a forest that earned its name every day, to identify plants. For a 12-year-old with the soul of a murdered king, who had read more books than most people had seen trees, the whole thing was agonizingly boring. He had to pretend to be fascinated while a happy-go-lucky tutor named Professor Hemlock pointed out all the ways a mushroom could melt your insides. "And this, class," the professor chirped, "is the Weeping Maiden. Its spores can make you see your worst nightmares." Fascinating, no? Arion mentally listed all the ways he could use those spores as a weapon. He kept up his act, the quiet, sickly prince, always at the back of the group, letting out a fake cough now and then. He caught Ceres's eye. She was the picture of a perfect student, hanging on the professor's every word. But he felt her amusement like a shared secret, a silent joke just between them. Their tormentor, Cassian, was busy trying to impress girls by falling off a rock. A small victory. But a new snake had appeared in the garden. Lord Rorik, a cold-eyed 16-year-old. He was cruel, ambitious, and saw Arion as a stepping stone to power. Rorik had been watching him for weeks, not with a bully's dumb anger, but with the cold, calculating eyes of a wolf. It was the innocent Professor Hemlock who handed him to the wolves. "Prince Arion," he called out. "They say a special plant, the king's mandrake, grows in lonely places off the main path. Legend says it makes the forest around it silent. See that dark patch of trees over there?" He pointed to a small, dark opening in the forest. "Go see if you can find one. A marvelous chance for extra credit. A death sentence disguised as an opportunity." Arion felt Rorik's stare lock onto him. This was a trap. He glanced at the professor's aura, and saw that the man's mind had been subtly twisted. Rorik had planted the idea, like a poison seed. Clever? Deadly? He gave Ceres one last look. For a split second, her calm broke, her eyes wide with fear. But there was nothing she could do. He had to go. "Of course, Professor," Arion said, and walked towards the trees, his entire body screaming a warning. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The moment he was out of sight, they appeared. Rorik stood in the center, with two older students, Vaughn and Kale, at his side. They weren't carrying wooden practice swords. They carried real, sharpened steel. "Extra credit, Ghost Prince." Rorik sneered, his voice a low, vicious purr. "No? I think it's time for a private lesson." "Rorik," Arion said, his voice firm as he backed away, his hand drifting toward the small knife on his belt. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was something. Cassian's little games were a joke. He tried to wound your pride. I, on the other hand, am here to wound you. Permanently. Vaughn and Kale spread out, blocking his escape. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't outfight them. Not with his body. The cold darkness inside him stirred, whispering promises of a swift, bloody victory. It wanted out. But revealing his power here would ruin everything. He had to rely on his training. Tricks. Speed. Kale lunged, a clumsy swing aimed at Arion's head. Arion dropped, a blur of motion. The sword whistled over him. He kicked a loose rock at Vaughn, making him flinch. In that instant, Arion was on his feet and running, not back to the class, but deeper into the woods. For a few frantic seconds, he thought he might actually get away. But Rorik was a hunter. He didn't chase, he waited. As Arion ducked behind a huge boulder, Rorik was just there. His foot shot out, catching Arion's ankle. Arion crashed to the ground, the air knocked out of his lungs. They were on him in a heartbeat. A boot slammed into his ribs. A fiery explosion of pain. He was rolled onto his back. Rorik stood over him, a cruel smile on his face. "You see, ghost. You can't escape what you are. A weed. We'll break your legs. You love the shadows so much. Let's see you crawl into them for the rest of your miserable life." That was it. The last thread of his control snapped. It wasn't a choice. It was the desperate, furious scream of a cornered animal. A darkness deeper than any forest answered him. The world went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The chirp of birds, the rustle of leaves, the sound of his own desperate breathing, all of it vanished, sucked into a black hole of silence. The light of the forest didn't just fade, it was eaten alive. Rorik and his thugs froze, their smug looks melting into pure, raw terror. The shadows in the woods were no longer shadows. They were alive. Tendrils of living darkness peeled away from the trees, wrapping around Arion like a cloak of pure night. He rose to his feet, an unseen force pushing Rorik's boot off his chest. His eyes were no longer grey, they were pits of empty blackness. Vaughn let out a choked cry and lunged, his sword aimed at Arion's neck. A piece of the dark cloak shot out, forming a shield of black glass. Vaughn's sword hit it and shattered, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead silence. Arion raised a hand. The shadow at his feet slithered up his arm and hardened into a long, wicked blade of pure void. "My turn," he whispered, his voice a chilling echo, the sound of nightmares and open graves. He moved, not like a boy, but like a phantom. He was in front of Kale before the big brute could even blink. The shadow blade wrapped around Kale's arm like a black snake. There was a sickening crack. Kale screamed, a muffled, horrifying sound, as his arm broke in two places. Vaughn scrambled backward, his face a mask of utter horror. Arion turned his full, chilling attention to Rorik. The proud lord stood frozen, his sword trembling in his hands. His arrogance had dissolved into pure fear. "You wanted to break me." Arion's echo voice whispered, inches from Rorik's face. He tapped Rorik's sword with his shadow blade. The steel weapon dissolved into a cloud of grey dust. Arion leaned in close, his black eyes staring into Rorik's soul. "Go back to your master," he hissed. "Tell him a ghost is coming for him. And pray you are not in my way when I do." Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Arion let the darkness retreat into him. Sound and color flooded back into the world. He stood there, a thin, pale boy again, gasping for breath. He didn't wait. He turned and vanished into the woods. Miles away, Seris sat in meditation. The air was warm. The garden was peaceful. Then, the darkness hit her. It was a psychic scream of terror and rage that tore through the world. Through the secret bond she shared with Arion, she felt the raw, explosive power of his awakening. It was a black hole opening in her soul. She gasped, her eyes flying open. Her control shattered. Her own fear for Arion, her panic, and her own hidden power collided. A soft hum filled the air. Then, from the very core of her being, light erupted. A golden, pure, living light burst from her in a silent, expanding dome. It was like a miniature sun, born in the heart of the garden. The light didn't burn, it healed. The grass around her grew vibrant and green. Rosebuds bloomed in an instant. A wounded bird under a bush suddenly healed and flew into the golden light. Seris floated an inch off the ground, the center of a beautiful, terrifying storm of life itself. Her teacher, Sir Kalen, fell to his knees, his face pale with awe. He was a man of logic and steel, and what he was seeing was a legend made real. "By the forgotten gods," he whispered. "It's real. The light receded back into Seris, and she collapsed onto the grass, gasping. Kaelan rushed to her, but he no longer saw a frail child. He saw something holy. "My lady," he said, his voice choked with awe. What are you?" Seris looked at her hands, where a faint golden warmth still glowed. She had felt Arion's darkness, a cold scar on their shared soul. His was the power of the void. Hers was the power of creation. His was the shadow. Hers was the light. They were no longer two children hiding. They were the ghost prince and the radiant star. Their whispered titles were no longer rumors. They were prophecies, about to come true. And the world had no idea of the storm that was about to break. The great hall of the Arion Royal Academy was electric with ambition. This was the day of the annual aura assessment. Here, in front of the entire kingdom's elite, the magical power of the young nobles would be measured, their futures decided in a flash of light. Lords and ladies in their finest silks watched from the galleries like hungry wolves. On the stage stood the chief mage, Arion Valerus, a man who looked like he had been carved from stone and was permanently annoyed. Beside him was the tool of judgment, the oculus stone. It was a giant, flawless crystal ball that would react to a person's inner power. A tiny flicker meant a life of boring desk work. A steady glow meant a decent career. But a brilliant flash, that was the stuff of legends. Seris stood among her peers, a perfect picture of a nervous girl in a simple white dress. But inside, her heart was a calm ocean, and her power was a sleeping sun. She caught Arion's eye. He stood at the back of the hall, looking paler and more invisible than usual. He gave her a tiny, secret nod. It's time. This would be their greatest performance yet. One by one, the students were called. The results were boring and predictable. Cassie and Valerus produced a solid yellow glow, earning polite applause. Rorik, whose arm was still in a sling from his hunting accident, managed a weak, silvery light. But his eyes kept darting toward Arion, filled with a fear he couldn't hide. He knew he'd seen a monster in the woods, but who would ever believe him? Then came Seris. Lady Seris of House Valerus, the Arion called, his voice flat with boredom. She walked to the stage, her head bowed as if she were shy, and placed her hands on the cold stone. For a moment, nothing happened. A few students laughed. Then, Seris took one, single, controlled breath. And the world exploded in gold. It wasn't a flicker. It was a sun. The oculus stone didn't just light up, it became a star. A pillar of pure, liquid gold light shot from the stone to the high ceiling, bathing the entire hall in a warm, stunning glow. The old tapestries on the wall seemed to bloom with new color. The very air vibrated with life. The crowd was shocked into absolute silence, their mouths hanging open. The Arion, for the first time in his life, lost his composure. He stumbled backward, his eyes as wide as dinner plates, shielding his face from the sheer force of the light. For 5 seconds, an eternity, the light held. Then Seris lifted her hands, and the golden pillar vanished. The silence stretched on, thick with awe. Then, the hall erupted in a roar of cheers and frantic whispers. A celestial core, a lord screamed, his voice trembling. I haven't seen power like that in 1,000 years. The Duke was on his feet, his face a mask of greedy triumph. The delicate pawn he had bought had just revealed herself to be a weapon beyond his wildest dreams. Seris, for her part, faked a graceful feint, letting a guard help her off the stage. Oh my, she whispered, her voice full of perfect confusion. I don't know what happened. After that, the rest of the assessments were a joke. Every other student's power was a firefly next to her sun. Finally, it was Arion's turn. Prince Arion of House Ilaria, the Arion announced, his voice still shaky. He looked at Arion with a flicker of desperate hope. Arion shuffled to the stage, looking like a ghost haunting his own life. He placed his hands on the oculus. He reached inside himself, to that cold, dark well of shadow power. With a surgeon's precision, he let a single, microscopic thread of that darkness leak out. He didn't want a flicker. He wanted a statement. The stone didn't just fail to light up. It became worse than dead. A faint wisp of grey smoke curled out of it and vanished. The stone's inner glow died completely, becoming a flat, lifeless rock. The Archon stared, horrified. It wasn't a lack of power, it was a magical black hole. Laughter erupted from the students. Cassian howled with joy. A black hole of talent. The Ghost Prince is a magical void. Arion lifted his hands, his face a perfect mask of shame. He met Seris's gaze. Her eyes, full of fake pity for the crowd, held a secret, burning pride. The trap was set. She was the divine savior. He was the pathetic failure, beneath anyone's notice. The perfect disguise. That night, their real war began. "I have Lady Omala's diary," Seris said, as they met in the Rose Maze. She handed him a small book. "Cassian hasn't just been cheating. He's been stealing magical supplies and selling them on the black market." A cruel smile touched Arion's lips. "And the Lord who ruined our parents. I have his secret ledgers," Seris said. "He's been selling Illyrian steel to our enemies. Treason." "Then let the hunt begin," Arion whispered. The first to fall was Cassian. Arion, moving like a living shadow, slipped through the locked doors of the academy. He didn't steal anything. He just rearranged the stolen goods in Cassian's room, making sure they would be found. The next day, when the Archon ordered a surprise inspection, Cassian's world came crashing down. He was expelled in disgrace. Next was Lord Perrin. Arion, cloaked in darkness, broke into the city's shipping guild. He became a ghost in the machine, altering the Lord's shipping records with ink made from his own shadow. When Perrin's smuggling ship arrived, it was met by the Royal Navy. The evidence, in the Lord's own falsified records, was absolute. His house fell overnight. Seris, with heartbreaking fake sympathy, took in his ruined daughter, earning praise for her kindness while gaining another pawn. One by one, their enemies were dismantled, often by their own secrets. It wasn't murder. It was surgery. The court was filled with paranoia, as if a vengeful god were cleaning house. And at the center of it all was Seris, the radiant star, her hands perfectly clean. But their perfect war did not go unnoticed. One night, while Arion practiced in his hidden crypt, he felt it. A watcher. Not a guard. This was old, cold, and alien. A presence that understood his darkness. A figure bled out of the stone wall, wearing a mask carved with a strange, spiral symbol. The man's voice was dry and raspy, like crumbling paper. "You wield the art like a butcher, child," he said. "But the power, it is pure. We have not felt its like in an age." Arion froze, hidden in the shadows. He recognized the symbol on the mask. The veiled hand. A death cult, long thought extinct, that worshipped pure chaos. "Do not be shy," the masked man continued. "We are not your enemies. We are your admirers. The Shadow King we once served had a court. We can be yours." He held out his hand. In it was a small, black-bladed knife. A gift. A key. "When you are ready to claim your true throne, the throne of night itself, we will be waiting." The man placed the knife on the ground and melted back into the wall. Arion's heart pounded in his chest. He slowly emerged and picked up the knife. A new, terrifying player had just entered the game. His secret war with Seris was no longer just about two of them. It was about to become far more complicated, and far more deadly. The Illyrian royal court was a beautiful, rotting corpse. The sunlight streamed through dusty windows, lighting up fraying tapestries, and a crowd of nobles with smiles as fake as spun glass. This was the Court of Thorns, where every flower had a poison thorn. Seris arrived in a carriage that seemed to carry the sun itself. At 15, she was a force of nature, her power and beauty the source of endless whispers and bitter envy. The king, desperate to save his crumbling kingdom, saw her as a miracle. He had officially named her a royal candidate for the throne. She stepped into the great hall, and the endless chatter died instantly. Every eye was on her, judging, wanting, fearing. The Duke walked beside her, puffed up with pride, presenting her like a prize horse. Seris wore her perfect mask of calm humility, but her senses were on fire. Her power let her see more than light. It let her read the world. Every person was an open book of swirling colors and emotional smells. The Minister of Finance was a sickly green of greed, sweating the sour stink of fear. A group of ladies-in-waiting pulsed with the sharp yellow of anxiety and the acid pink of jealousy. The air was thick with conspiracy and ambition. Her greatest rival, Lady Iona, stood near the throne. She was a woman carved from ice and iron, the clear frontrunner for the succession. Her aura was the color of cold steel and storm clouds, ruthless, calculating, and empty of warmth. When she saw Seris, her lips tightened into a razor-thin line. "Ah, the little miracle," Iona said, her voice dripping with fake kindness. "The Duke must be so proud." Seris bowed her head. "Lady Iona, I am eager to learn from your experience." It was a perfect picture of a humble, young girl. But as Iona spoke, Seris focused on her stormy grey aura, and felt the sharp, bitter spike of a lie. "These halls have a way of swallowing up pretty things that rise too fast," Iona said, a threat disguised as advice. "Then I will be careful where I step," Seris replied, her smile perfect. "Though I find light often chases away the most troublesome shadows." A direct hit. The first shot had been fired in a war of silk and smiles. While Seris danced in the light, Arion became the court's ghost. His disastrous power assessment had worked perfectly. He was dismissed, forgotten, a non-person haunting the dusty library. At 15, he was deceptively strong. He moved through the palace like a shadow. He could melt into the darkness, his body becoming almost nothing, allowing him to slip under locked doors and through cracks in the walls. His days were for studying. His nights were for hunting secrets. Standing in the total darkness of a closet next to the Duke's study, Arion listened. "The girl is a problem, Valerus," a voice hissed. "Lord Riven, Iona's right-hand man. Iona will crush her. And you with her. I need something to use against her." "Some weakness." "There is nothing," the Duke replied. "She's a saint. Unless you want to create a weakness." "She has friends from the academy," Riven whispered. "Perhaps they can be encouraged to talk." "A plan. A weakness to exploit." Arion slid out of the closet as silently as he'd entered. They had a system. An old, hollow statue in a forgotten garden. Every night, Arion left his findings, written in their secret code. Every morning, Seris collected them. "Iona is losing patience. They are going to come after your friends." Seris was a master. In a tense council meeting, she didn't raise her voice. She released a slow, controlled wave of her aura. It was like a warm sunbeam on a cold day, a wave of pure calm that instantly extinguished the fires of anger. "My lords," she said into the sudden silence. "Rage will not feed our people." She turned a shouting match into a strategy session, terrifying the older politicians. They couldn't bully her. They couldn't even shake her. But Iona wasn't playing their game. A few nights later, Arion was on the rooftops, moving like the wind. He felt a disturbance in the palace wards. An intruder. He found the man in the ventilation shafts above Ceres's room. He was a professional, carrying a needle dripping with poison. An assassin from Iona. Arion dropped into the shaft behind him, his landing silent. The air turned to ice. The narrow shaft plunged into total blackness. The assassin froze, trapped. Arion didn't give him a chance to scream. He solidified the shadows around the man's throat. A crushing weight of pure void. "A message for the Duchess," Arion whispered, his voice a chilling rasp right in the man's ear. "Stay out of the shadows. They belong to me." There was a sharp, sickening snap. He let the darkness consume the body, turning it to nothing but dust, and took only one thing, the poison needle. He left it at the statue for Seris, with a note: "Iona's dog has been put down. She sent poison. Here's your new blade." 2 days later, at a grand banquet, Seris floated through the crowd. She paused at Iona's table. "Lady Iona, you look troubled," she said, her voice full of fake concern. "Missing someone? An acquaintance, perhaps? Someone good with needles?" She subtly let the poisoned needle roll under Iona's table, unseen by anyone else. Iona's eyes widened. She saw the needle. A shiver of pure terror ran down her spine. The girl knew. Her man hadn't just failed. He had vanished without a trace. Iona's aura, once cold steel, was now the chaotic grey of fear. But Seris wasn't finished. She leaned in and looked at Lord Riven, Iona's advisor. "Lord Riven," she said sweetly, "I was just talking about shipping records with the minister. It's funny how some records from years ago show that a shipment of steel meant for the Iron Marches never actually arrived, but was listed as delivered." Riven, who had been stealing from both Iona and the Duke for years, turned white as a sheet. Iona's head turned slowly, her steely gaze locking onto her now former advisor. "Do enjoy the banquet," Seris said with a perfect smile. She drifted away, leaving chaos in her wake. Iona's primary strategist was ruined, and she was now terrifyingly aware that some unseen, unstoppable force was protecting the girl. Fear gripped the Court of Thorns. Those who opposed the Radiant Star didn't just fail, they disappeared. Secrets were unearthed, careers collapsed. And while Seris blinded them with her light, the shadows in the palace seemed to grow longer and colder. The court was beginning to understand. Step on the Radiant Star, and you risk waking the Ghost Prince. The king, in a desperate, foolish move, announced the Grand Royal Tournament. He claimed it was to celebrate the youth of the kingdom. In reality, it was a cheap trick to distract the starving masses with what they really wanted, blood. For Arion and Seris, it was a disaster. They had built a perfect illusion of brilliant light and pathetic weakness. A public tournament was a wild card that could ruin everything. But Lady Iona, a cornered wolf, saw her chance. She twisted the king's ear, and the rules were changed. Participation was now mandatory for all royal candidates. It was a brilliant, vicious trap. Seris was a beacon of light, but her power was not for brutal, one-on-one combat. If she won, it would ruin her saintly image. If she lost, her myth of perfection would be shattered. But the real target was Arion. Iona made sure that as the last male of the royal line, his participation was a matter of national honor. He was to be a lamb, slaughtered in public, to erase the last memory of the old kings. "She's trapped us," Seris said, her voice a low, furious whisper, as they stood in their garden sanctuary. "She wants to see you broken in that arena, to prove to the world you're nothing." Arion stood staring into the darkness. The small, black-bladed knife, a gift from the secret cult, was cold against his skin. "Then I'll have to give them a show," he said, his voice empty. "What will you do?" Seris asked, fear creeping into her voice. "You can't win without showing them what you are." "I won't win," Arion replied. "Winning makes you a target. Losing makes you a fool. No. I'm going to make them afraid." The arena was a monster of stone and sand, roaring with the sound of a bloodthirsty crowd. Arion stood in the tunnels below, wearing simple black leather that hung on his thin body. He held no sword, no shield. The other fighters, hulking brutes and arrogant knights, looked at him with pity and disgust. "An easy kill." "Don't worry, Ghost Prince," sneered a mountain of a man named Jorand. "I'll make it quick." Arion just stared at him with his dead, empty eyes and said nothing, which was far more terrifying than any threat. His first opponent was a knight named Sir Malvin, whose gleaming silver armor had clearly never seen a real fight. The horn blew. Malvin charged, his huge sword raised for a dramatic, crowd-pleasing kill. Arion didn't move. He stood perfectly still, and as the knight closed in, he reached into the cold abyss inside him and pulled. Arion's shadow on the sand stopped being a shadow. It rose from the ground, a pillar of writhing, living darkness with two glowing red eyes. The crowd's roar died in an instant. The shadow monster lunged forward. Malvin's huge sword passed through it like it was smoke. Two black tendrils shot out, grabbing Malvin's arm and leg, stopping him dead. Another tendril formed a sharp, black blade, hovering inches from the knight's face. Sir Malvin froze, his bravery melting into pure terror. In the royal box, Iona's face was a mask of stone, but her white-knuckled grip on the railing betrayed her shock. This was not the pathetic weakling she had planned to humiliate. This was a monster. Yield, Arion's voice boomed, led with an unholy echo. I yield. Malvin shrieked. The shadows instantly vanished, collapsing back into a normal shape on the sand. The entire arena was gripped in a profound, terrified silence. They hadn't seen magic. Magic was fireballs and lightning. This was something else. This was wrong. Arion turned his back and walked away. The next fighter, Jorund, who had been so arrogant minutes before, took one look at Arion and immediately forfeited his match, scrambling to get away. Arion's message was sent. Panic swept through the nobles. The Ghost Prince had summoned something unholy. He hadn't just defeated his opponent, he'd terrorized him. As fear of Arion grew, Seris began her own war. She walked through the infirmaries, not as a princess, but as a healer. She laid her hands on the wounded, and a gentle, golden light flowed from her palms. Fevers broke. Pain vanished. His power, it is darkness, a wounded knight whispered to her. Even the darkest night is broken by the dawn, Seris replied, her voice soft and full of compassion. She wasn't just healing them, she was spinning a new story. Arion was the necessary darkness, the terrifying shield. She was the light, the compassionate heart. A faction began to form around her. The soldiers, the nobles, even the general of the city guard, knelt before her, begging to be her shield against the shadows. The final round arrived. Arion had advanced by a series of forfeits. No one would face him. But just before the match, Iona stood up. This is a tournament of arms, not of shadow puppets, she screamed. I demand he fight with steel, or be branded a coward. It was a desperate move. Strip him of his power and force him into a fight he couldn't win. The weak king agreed. A sword was brought to Arion. He took it, then looked up at Iona and smiled, a chilling, dead smile. He tossed the sword to the sand. Then he drew the small, black-bladed knife from his belt, a sliver of pure void. This is steel, he announced, his voice ice. I accept. Then he did the last thing anyone expected. He turned his back and walked away. Forfeit. Iona shrieked, victorious. No, Arion called over his shoulder. I withdraw. He paused at the gate and looked back at the stunned arena. This game is beneath me. And he was gone. He had shown them his power, proved he was beyond their rules, and then dismissed their entire world as irrelevant. In the royal box, Seris watched him go, a serene, knowing smile on her face. Her followers were loyal. Her ghost king had just declared he answered to no one. Their pieces were on the board. Soon, they would make their final move. The tournament had shattered the court's fragile peace, and from the wreckage, two new legends rose. They were whispers in every tavern and every castle hall, the radiant star, Lady Seris, the divine healer whose light promised a new age, and the ghost prince, Arion, the terrifying shadow wielder, who answered to no one. They were no longer just royal candidates. They were myths. Arion found that his terrifying display in the arena had bought him something better than a crown, to be left alone. The academy students fled from him. The professors flinched when he entered a room. He used this fear as a shield, spending all his time in the palace library and the hidden crypt of Malika, the ancient Shadow King. The crypt was his true home. The old book he had found there was more than just a book, it was a key. He no longer just commanded the shadows, he talked to them, he listened to their secrets. He learned to sense the weak spots in the world where the real world and the shadow world were closest. One night, he brushed his hand against a stone on the ancient sarcophagus. It felt hollow. He pushed. With a low groan, a hidden compartment slid open. Inside was a single object. A twisted circlet of black metal that was impossibly cold. On it were the same strange symbols as the mask of the man from the secret cult. This was the crown of the Shadow King. When his fingers touched it, a shock of pure information, of pure power, shot through him. He saw visions of a forgotten king who ruled not from a throne of gold, but from a throne of shadows. He saw an army of shadow soldiers rising from the darkness to slit the throats of sleeping generals. And he saw the crown's true power. It was a tool that could reach through the darkness and into the minds of men, planting seeds of fear, of confusion, of doubt. It was mind control. Arion pulled his hand back, gasping. The power was intoxicating, but the psychic ghost of Malika was too strong, too hungry. He wasn't ready to wear the crown. Not yet. He began to practice the mind arts, targeting the rats in the palace walls. For weeks, he failed. But one night, exhausted and frustrated, he didn't try to command. He just whispered. Rest, he projected into the shadow engulfing a rat. The rat stopped, then curled up and went to sleep. A triumphant, dangerous smile spread across his face. He couldn't control them like puppets, but he could influence them. He could implant emotions. And that was a devastating weapon. While Arion explored the darkness, Seris unlocked the secrets of the light. Her growing fame gave her access to the deepest, most forbidden archives of the palace. There, she found the aura tomes of the First Dynasty. They weren't books. They were 3 floating spheres of pure, glowing light. She stepped into the sealed chamber, and as she touched the first sphere, her world dissolved into a symphony of golden light. She saw through the eyes of the ancient Queen Solara the Radiant. She saw how Solara used her power not just to heal, but to create. Solara pulled life from dead soil, making crops grow in an instant. She learned how to focus her light into a burning beam of divine fury, a weapon to burn away evil like a disease. She learned to weave her light into shields, to cauterize wounds in the middle of a battle. When she emerged from the chamber hours later, she was pale, but her eyes blazed. The radiant star could also be a burning sun. Their first real test came with Lord Vorlag, a loud, stupid lord who was still loyal to Iona. He called Seris's power witchcraft and Arion's pure evil. He was an annoying fly, buzzing in their ears. Arion decided it was time to swat him. That night, Arion didn't travel to Vorlag's castle. He reached out with his mind, finding the deepest shadow in the Lord's own bedroom. From miles away, in his hidden crypt, Arion whispered into that darkness. He didn't give orders. He just fed Vorlag's own paranoia, making him feel like he was being watched, turning every creak and whisper of the wind into the sound of assassins. Lord Vorlag woke up in a cold sweat, screaming that there were killers in his room. For 3 nights, Arion tormented him, a slow, patient campaign of pure psychological terror. On the 4th day, the sleep-deprived, paranoid lord accused his own second-in-command of treason. A fight broke out. His men, seeing their lord's madness, abandoned him. Vorlag's power crumbled from the inside out, without a single drop of blood being shed. He was left a babbling, broken man. Seris, in her brilliance, dealt with the aftermath. A loyal captain from Vorlag's men, a good man named Bren, came to the capital, his men on the verge of desertion, his own arm broken from the fight. Seris met him in the palace gardens. She listened to his story, then placed a hand on his injured arm. A warm, golden light surrounded the limb. Bren gasped as he felt the bones knit together, the pain vanishing in an instant. He looked at her with pure awe. "Your people don't need a strong hand, Captain," Seris said softly. "They need hope." She gave him a pouch of gold. "Go home. Pay your men. And tell them their new empress has not forgotten them." Bren, who had only ever known the orders of angry, brutish lords, knelt before her and pledged his undying loyalty, not to the kingdom, but to her. She had healed a wound, but she had also captured an army. With her light, she was mending the broken pieces of the kingdom and binding them to her. Arion, with his darkness, was creating the cracks for her to fix. The twin crowns were rising, wielding the legacies of forgotten kings. The stage was set. All that was left was the final act, the taking of the throne. The day of the coronation was grey and heavy, the sky like a metal sheet. A tense, unnatural silence hung over the city. Today, the nobles would choose a new heir. Today, the kingdom would either find its future or die. In her room, Seris stood before a mirror, a vision in white and gold. Her dress was a political masterpiece, simple, but woven with threads of pure gold that caught the light. Her face was calm, but her mind was a storm of plans. Today was either total victory or total failure. There was no in-between. Arion was with her, a caged panther in black leather. "It's too quiet," he muttered. "Iona is not the type to go down without a fight. She has no moves left to make." "Arion," Seris said, her voice calm as a deep lake. "Her support is gone. The military and the people are with me." "Hope is a fine thing, Seris," Arion said, his grey eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "But a cornered animal only cares about its teeth." He tapped the black knife at his belt. "Let's hope our teeth are sharper." A soft knock. It was time. The great hall was a tinderbox. Every noble house was there, their colourful banners hanging in the stale air. King Theron sat on his throne like a ghost haunting his own life. After two other candidates gave weak, forgotten speeches, it was Lady Iona's turn. She looked like a ghost herself, her eyes holding a feverish, desperate light. She gave a bitter speech, warning against theatrical magic, the words of a woman who already knew she had lost. Finally, it was Ceres's turn. She walked to the center of the hall, a single point of light in the gloom. She didn't speak. She just let a tiny fraction of her celestial aura radiate out, a gentle warmth, a silent promise of hope. The vote began. It was a landslide. Seris was named the new heir. The chief mage stepped forward, holding the heavy crown of Valeria. This was the moment. And then, hell broke loose. A guard burst in, an arrow in his shoulder. "Rebels," he screamed, before collapsing. "The gates are breached." The huge stained glass windows of the hall exploded inwards. Figures in rough leather swarmed into the room, armed and organized. Screams filled the hall as nobles scrambled for cover. It was a perfectly executed coup. And standing on a balcony above the chaos, watching with a triumphant, insane smile, was Lady Iona. If she couldn't have the throne, she would burn the kingdom to the ground. Arion had been right. But he had teeth, too. As the rebels charged, he moved, not as a prince, but as a weapon. "General," he roared, his voice cutting through the panic. "The Empress. Protect her." The general and his men formed a steel ring around Seris. Arion leaped onto the dais, toward the empty throne at the heart of the storm. He drew the Shadow King's knife and plunged it deep into the armrest of the stone throne. The effect was instant and horrifying. The knife was a key. The throne was an anchor. By joining them, Arion connected himself to every shadow in the palace. The great hall was plunged into a deep, unnatural twilight. The shadows peeled away from the walls, from the floors, from the cowering nobles, and rose like a black tide. From that twilight, an army emerged. Silent, faceless soldiers made of solid darkness, with burning red eyes and carrying swords of pure void. Malika's shadow army had been reborn. The rebels, so confident moments before, froze in absolute terror. Now, Arion's voice boomed, the voice of a king of nightmares. The coronation may continue. His army attacked. There was no clash of steel, only the screams of the dying. The shadow soldiers were unstoppable. Swords passed through them. Their own blades cut through armor and flesh like it was paper. They were a silent, terrifying wave of death. Lady Iona watched from her balcony, her smile frozen into a mask of pure horror. She hadn't just lost, she had unleashed a god of death. As Arion's army crushed the main force, a squad of elite rebel assassins scrambled up the walls, their target Seris. The general's men met them in a desperate clash of steel. One assassin broke through, his dagger aimed for Ceres's heart. She didn't flinch. She raised her hands, drew on the full, unrestrained power of her celestial core, and unleashed it. A wave of pure, divine fire erupted from her, a holy light that didn't burn stone, but corruption. The assassin screamed as the light hit him and dissolved into a cloud of glowing dust. The wave expanded, washing over the hall. The rebels screamed as it struck them, their dark hearts making them weak. They dropped their weapons and fled, their morale shattered. The loyal guards, however, felt only warmth and courage, their fear washed away. In the aftermath, the hall was a surreal vision of devastation and glory. The floor was littered with defeated rebels. And at the center of it all stood the twin sovereigns. Arion, a king of night with his silent shadow army behind him. Seris, an empress of the dawn, radiating a gentle, golden light. The surviving nobles fell to their knees as one, their faces a mix of terror and awe. Seris walked to the dais. She and Arion looked at each other, not as siblings, but as two halves of a whole. The boy raised in shadows and the girl forged in light. He picked up the old crown of Valeria. "My empress," he said, his voice clear and quiet. She took the crown but didn't put it on. She looked at the kneeling court, then at her other half. "This crown is for the world to see," she declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "It belongs to the light of Valeria." She placed it upon her own head. "But a crown of light casts a long shadow," she continued, her eyes finding Arion's. "And that shadow needs its king." They had taken the throne. Not by vote, not by birth, but by blood, brilliance, and a bond that was stronger than death itself. Peace settled over Valeria like fresh snow, beautiful, but covering a cold, hard world. It had been 1 year since the burning coronation, a day now spoken of like a myth. In that year, the kingdom was reborn, its rotting foundations torn out and replaced with something forged of light and darkness. Empress Seris, the radiant star, was a ruler like no other. She held court in the open palace gardens, her presence a calming balm on her anxious people. Her reign began with a miracle. She poured her life-giving energy into the dead farmlands of the north, and overnight, withered crops grew green and full. It cemented her as a divine figure, and filled the kingdom's grain silos for the first time in a generation. She governed with a wisdom far beyond her years, untangling lies with her ability to see the truth in men's souls. She was beloved. She was the sun. But every sun casts a shadow. Arion held no public title. The court whispered about him, calling him the shadow of the empress, the ghost king. He never attended court. He never went to banquets. To most, he was a terrifying memory. They were wrong. Arion had never been busier. He was Valeria's spymaster, its enforcer, its unseen executioner. While Seris built the new world, Arion hunted the monsters in its dark corners. His throne was the cold, stone sarcophagus in the hidden crypt beneath the palace. Here, surrounded by a darkness that felt like home, he commanded a silent kingdom. Wearing the crown of the Shadow King, he could stretch his mind across the entire nation, listening to the whispers of darkness, sensing the echoes of secret conversations. One evening, he sat on his stone throne, hunting. The secret cult, the Veiled Hand, saw him as their messiah, destined to plunge the world into eternal night. They were an annoyance that needed to be removed. His mind soared over the city until he found what he was looking for. A pocket of darkness that felt oily and wrong, deep in the catacombs. He descended upon it with his mind. He saw a dozen robed figures, chanting. They didn't feel his presence. From his crypt miles away, Arion reached out and wove their deepest fears into the darkness of their chamber. To a man who feared spiders, the shadows began to crawl. To a woman terrified of drowning, the air grew thick and heavy, crushing her. To their leader, Arion whispered a single, devastating idea directly into his mind: doubt. He made him feel the terrifying, empty truth that the void they worshipped felt nothing for him. Panic erupted. The cultists tore at each other, fleeing from their own nightmares. Their faith shattered. The threat was broken, not by steel, but by a whisper from the shadows. A soft, golden light filled the crypt. "Showing off again, brother?" Seris's voice was full of warm amusement, as she walked down the stone steps. Just some routine pest control, he replied, a rare smile on his lips. Seris looked at the dark crown in his hands. Does it ever tempt you? She asked, her voice serious. Arion's smile vanished. Every second, he admitted. It whispers that fear is better than hope. It wants me to become a monster. But you are not a monster, Seris said, her voice a solid anchor. She placed a warm hand on his arm, and the contrast of her light against his cold skin was a jolt of reality. You have me. It was their balance. His darkness was vast, but her light kept him human. Her burden was immense, but his silent support was the pillar she leaned on. A sharp knock interrupted them. An emissary from the iron-fisted Northern Empire had arrived, demanding to see the Empress and the Ghost King. The emissary was a giant of a man named High Lord Fenrir, who stood in the Great Hall radiating pure arrogance. He didn't bow. My Emperor sends his congratulations, he growled. He offers to protect your weak southern lands in exchange for a yearly tribute. It was a demand for land and money, backed by a threat of war. Seris smiled her serene smile. Your Emperor's concern is touching. But our lands are quite secure. Your confidence is misplaced, little Empress, Fenrir sneered. My Emperor's armies could crush you before the next harvest. And yet, Seris countered, you seem troubled, High Lord. Is it perhaps the shadows? On cue, Arion emerged from the darkness behind the throne. He wasn't there one moment, and was the next. He wore the shadow crown, his eyes like pits of night. Fenrir flinched, his hand flying to his axe. The stories were real. High Lord, Arion said, his voice a quiet, chilling rasp. My sister handles matters of state. I handle security. Tell me, how are things in your fortress at Iron Peak Pass? Fenrir's blood ran cold. The location of the Emperor's war room was a top secret. You came here with 5 guards, Arion continued, his voice a soft murmur. One is in a tavern. Another is in the market. The last one is in an alley with one of my agents. A woman named Lila. She has a rather charming little dagger hidden in her garter. And she is one of mine. Fenrir's face turned white. He was a warrior, a general, and he knew in that moment he had walked straight into a spider's web. Ilaria is not the broken kingdom you remember, Seris said, her voice rising with power. We have survived death and betrayal. We have remade ourselves in fire and darkness. Arion stepped up beside her, a perfect silhouette of night next to her brilliant light. Together, they spoke their final words, a warm promise and a cold threat intertwining as one. We do not fall. High Lord Fenrir stared at them, the Empress of Light and the King of Shadows. He had come to kick in a rotten door, only to find a gate of diamond and void. He did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He bowed. A deep, respectful, and terrified bow. My apologies, he stammered, and practically fled the hall. Later that night, Arion and Seris stood on the highest balcony, looking out over their capital. The city lights twinkled like stars on the earth. Do you think they'll be back? Seris asked. Eventually, Arion replied. War is never far. The world is not a kind place. No, she agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. It isn't. They stood there, the twin sovereigns, eternal and watchful. She, the sun that nourished their kingdom, he, the night that guarded its borders. They had been murdered, they had been reborn, and they had clawed their way to the top of the world, not as 2 rulers, but as 2 halves of one, unbreakable throne. They would never, ever fall again.